How did it come that Nick Robinson starred in the film? Would you introduce some stories about him?
First question is, how did it come that Nick Robinson was in Kings of Summer, and whether I have any stories about him? We looked at everybody. We saw so many tapes and I auditioned so many kids because I loved the script that was written by Chris Galetta, and it was such a unique role and such a special role, and it took months. I saw probably every single kid that was working in Hollywood, and Nick Robinson came in one day, and there was just something special about it. There was something unique about it, and I was kind of hoping to discover somebody new in the process. I love when movies introduce you to new people, and there's a lot of kids that you said, oh, that kid's in that teen movie, and that kid's in that teen movie, and that kid's in that teen movie. And so the idea of being able to take a script as original as Kings of Summer and put someone new in front of your face, that was appealing to me. And Nick had never been in a movie before. He was on a TV show I'd never seen, but there was just something very unique and effortless about him and what he brought to it. So it sort of became a no-brainer, and I feel like now I'm sort of stuck with him forever. He's kind of turned into my weird little brother that I like to give shit to. He's the best. He's obviously gone on to have an incredible career, and he will go on to probably have a much better career than I will. He just has that innate effortlessness in him that very few actors, much less people, have. And as far as stories go, I mean, there's an endless amount of stories of us just in the woods doing dumb things, just throwing logs and playing pranks on each other and being up at weird hours because we're shooting night shoots. And it was a joy to be able to have him and the rest of the cast, because so much of that movie to me was about trying to capture the essence of being a teenager and the purity of being a teenager. And the thing that I kept saying going into that movie was, I want to have 5 or 6 moments throughout where you could just look at the screen and say, that little thing, that little tick, that's what it is to be a teenager. The small little just mannerisms that you almost can't teach. And so things like them banging on the log, that whole montage, that's them. That's them being boys and us just having to capture it. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And if you ever see him, you should call him Nighthawk, because that's the nickname we gave him.
What is the most impressive memory of a summer from your youth, and is that story reflected in your film?
The question is what the most impressive memory is from my youth and whether that was reflected in the film. Oddly enough, when I was a teenager, I left my parents' home and I went and lived in the attic of my grandmother's house across the country. And so I kind of lived this weird approximation of Kings of Summer without actually being in the woods. But I always had a treehouse in my backyard, and we always built forts, and I was just kind of a troublemaker. I would always find weird schemes. Joe very much is me as a character. Many people have observed about that and joked around about that. As far as memories from my youth, I was a weird kid because I think I was nostalgic for my youth before it was ever even over. I always knew that it was going to come to an end, and that was sad to me, and I didn't want to grow up because I knew that that freedom would suddenly go away and we would never have that again. But I think I've also forgotten the majority of my childhood. So I just remember being a troublemaker and building forts and creating weird adventures and walking around with my friends at night and just finding schemes. That's what we did. And the movie very much as a whole, I think that spirit is very similar to, I think, what my childhood was.
Which film or director influenced you on this movie, and what's your favorite film about summer?
The question is which films influenced me on this movie and what my favorite film about summer is. Obviously, Stand By Me and early Amblin stuff like Back to the Future and E.T., those are huge touchstones for Kings of Summer. But also a very huge touchstone for the film, for me, is the work of Terrence Malick. I love how ethereal his work is. I love how lyrical it is. Badlands was a huge reference, and just all of his work and the way that he sort of captures memory, that was a very, very big influence for me on this movie. I like playing with tone, and so my influences are all over the place, and there's there's the sort of classic Spielberg in the film, and then there's, you know, much weirder, artsy Tarkovsky stuff in the film. But my favorite summer films, Stand By Me is obviously up there. I always jokingly sort of say Bad Boys 2, just because that movie palpably is sweaty and hot, and you get this sort of like summer Miami vibe to it, and it's so over the top. But anytime anyone asks me about my favorite movies, I just sort of ramble because there's too many of them.
Next one. I was very surprised that Nick, Aaron, and Moises appeared in Constant Island in the bar scene. How did that come across?
The question is how Nick, Aaron, and Moises appeared in the bar scene of Kong Skull Island, and that was me just wanting to put them in there. I like the idea of putting those kids in the rest of my movies, and in just as actors, or ideally hiding them. I like the idea that Joe, Biagio, and Kelly would appear sort of as those characters throughout whatever films I'm making. So I just called them up one day. I said, hey, I'm shooting this thing. I want to put you in the background of a shot. I want to fly you out here. And they were all like, great, let's do it. So they all got on planes and flew to Hawaii for a day or two. And, you know, that's my family. I have so much love for all of them as people and as actors. So it was just great to see them.
In Kings of Summer, not to mention the wonderful boys, but I think Joe's father is very well depicted. The character is not too exaggerated, but unpleasant in a funny way, so that makes our sympathy for the boys stronger. Are there any differences between young characters and adults in the way you write and direct them? And do you reflect your feelings of your own parents onto these characters?
The main question is there any difference between young characters and adults in the way that you write and direct them? And the thing I would say to that is filmmaking is filmmaking to some degree. Characters are characters, and so you still have to understand what makes a character tick. Getting into kids, that's a slightly more complicated thing at times, because there's something about your youth and there's something about the way your brain works when you are a kid that once that's gone, it's very difficult to capture. It's very difficult to capture the weird mannerisms, idiosyncrasies, and things that are going on when your brain is developing in that way. Because to me, a very specific part of that movie was trying to capture the moment in someone's life when you have to fall flat on your face. Very hard. Very publicly and very embarrassingly, because I think that moment at that point in your life when you fall on your face, that's how you define yourself. I think that's how you pick yourself up in that moment is going to define, I think, how you pick yourself up for every moment as you move forward in life. I just think there's something very defining about that, and I think that age and the age about the kids that we were making this movie about, that's the moment. So it was great being able to cast kids who were sort of 16, 17, 18, as opposed to 22-year-olds playing young kids. And so it's always different between children and adults, and they each bring very different things to it. I loved the cast that we had. The second part of the question is whether there are any of my parents reflected in this. Yeah, I think my father probably has a difficult time watching this movie to some degree. I think those relationships are complicated, and I think anybody to some degree can watch a movie like this or should watch a movie like this and see similarities, because there's just an inevitable quality that children and their parents, to some degree, almost are not meant to get along in some ways. It's almost weird to me when I meet kids who get along way too well with their parents. That kind of freaks me out. So there's definitely like slight autobiographical elements in there, but I love my parents very much. I would not run away into the woods to find them.
I'm interested in the way you view nature, for example, the light in the trees. I get the impression that the way you film nature is not just about you, but about showing the glowing essence of each moment. Can you talk a bit about how you shoot nature?
The question is about how I shoot nature and what the purpose of it is. And I think that goes back to my obsession with the work of Terrence Malick and the sort of lyrical, impressionistic, ethereal vibe of it. And for me, it's not just about capturing a shot. It's not just, hey, here's a tree, but it's about capturing a feeling. And it's about capturing a texture, and it's about capturing sort of an idea. And I love stringing that stuff together in ways that evoke something more than the sum of its parts. I think that with this movie, we wanted to capture this beauty, but the larger than life quality, the sort of freedom outside of these children's homes, the ability to escape to something grander, almost something mythological. And I love macro shots. If I could make a movie that was all montage, I probably would. I just love getting lost in that stuff. And a really big part of Kings of Summer was me asking the question of how do you combine really ethereal, lyrical, sort of beautiful nature shots with Nick Offerman telling dick jokes? Like, how do you ram those two ideas, those very different ideas, up into each other? And that's one of the things that I'm actually most proud of in the film.
You direct in a wide range of genres. What do you pay attention to when you carefully maneuver each genre in a film?
The question is, what do I pay attention to as I maneuver between genres in the films that I make? And I think that every film has its own set of rules, and you have to understand those rules, and you have to understand those tropes and those conventions, because I think audiences need to see new things. And the reason that films feel like you've seen them over and over again is that people either don't understand the rules or they just play into them. And so it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. So as you go from a small coming-of-age indie comedy into a giant monster movie, to some degree, there's a bunch of things that are similar between those that sort of go back and forth. And then there's an enormous amount of difference between those two things. And you need to understand kind of the Bible of each of those things so that you can, if you understand them well enough, then you can break the rules, and you can break the rules with meaning.
Biagio is a unique and very strange character, but makes me think of someone I may have had as a classmate. Was Biagio based on anyone in particular in your life? If so, do you have any stories about that person?
The question is Biagio based on anyone? Because he's such a weirdo. Chris, who wrote the movie, I would say that there's probably someone he's slightly based off of, but in fact, it might be him, the writer. There's sort of there's a joke that if I'm Joe, another friend of ours is Patrick, and Chris, the writer, is Biagio, which is only semi-accurate. But Biagio more so, I think, is based on that idea of that kid that everyone knew. The kid off to the side of the playground who's fighting with bees, or the kid who's like carrying around milk cartons all day. Like every school has that kid, that just super strange oddity of a human. And the goal was to, how do you take that weirdo and make him the heart of the film in a strange way? Like he almost, like Dobby, it's Dobby, right, in Harry Potter? Dobby. He almost has like the Dobby quality in Harry Potter, where he's such a little weirdo, but you care so much for him, and so much of the build of our film actually relies on you applying a certain amount of like pathos and sort of human emotion to a character who seemingly doesn't know human emotion. So he's kind of based on every little weirdo out there.
I'm a big fan of your work, especially Kings of Summer, which reminded me of my youth, its miserableness, and the bittersweet memories. My question to you is about your choice of music. I get the feeling that you chose rock music, which matched the theme of the film like a good DJ. In Kong Skull Island, you used hard and psychedelic rock musicians like Black Sabbath and David Bowie to match the atmosphere of the Vietnam War era. And Kings of Summer, you used indie rock like MGMT and Youth Lagoon to match the helplessness and the juvenile story. Do you feel that you pay particular attention to music, and do you have any memories about music in your life?
The question is whether I have any memories of music in my life, and if I said no to that, I would be a real weirdo, I think. Yes, I have memories of music in my life, but the bigger question is how I choose music and the usage of indie music in particular. But also, at the beginning of this question, the person asking it described childhood as this mix of like awful despair and like beautiful memories, which is a pretty perfect way to describe your childhood. Awful despair and beautiful moments. I think that kind of is what Kings of Summer is. So I wish I could put that on the poster. Kings of Summer, awful despair, beautiful memories. I actually don't really like indie rock, oddly enough. I think the MGMT stuff was really fitting for this. I think the Youth Lagoon songs are really beautiful. I'm kind of obsessed with hip hop and largely listen to that. Being able to put Thin Lizzy in Kings of Summer was one of my favorite moments in life. I love that band so much. I would put a Thin Lizzy song in everything. You know, in Kong it was amazing because we had the money to license, you know, these super expensive, amazing, like pillars of 70s psychedelic classic rock. We didn't really have a budget like that in Kings of Summer. For me, it's all based on the project. It's based on what the scene deserves. You know, it'd be super easy in a film like this to have really sweet acoustic guitars. You know, like there's a version of the soundtrack that you've seen over and over and over again. And the Youth Lagoon stuff and the MGMT stuff did have sort of a trippy nature to it, but also I wanted it to feel more modern in, like, to me the whole movie is sort of based on this idea of if the Stand By Me kids could actually go and run away into the woods, what happens when my generation, who wasn't raised like that, didn't fight wars like that, when they go run away into the woods, when we're just raised on Zelda and that's the closest thing that we have to go into the woods, what happens? And it doesn't go well. And so I wanted that sort of psychedelic, getting lost feeling, and then I wanted to be able to hit it with that hip-hop track in the middle, because I think that's how that kid would be viewing what they were going through at the time. So I love music. I love usage of music in movies. In fact, that's mainly how I listen to music, is the music that I consume through film. There's nothing greater in life than watching a movie and there's just the perfectly timed song to the perfectly timed scene. Like, that's, I think, one of the best feelings.
Judging from your appearance and the boys in this film, you seem to have some sort of obsession with beards. I want to know why you adhere to the beard and why you find it so interesting.
The question is why I'm obsessed with beards. I don't really think I'm obsessed with beards. I always liked facial hair. I always wanted it when I was a kid. I thought it was exciting to be able to shave. And I could always grow facial hair pretty early. So in like middle school, I would do like a Civil War mustache, or at one point I had like a porn star mustache, or like big sideburns. I always thought that was fun. In Kings of Summer, like, just growing a beard, and that's such an idea of manhood, you know? Like, in fact, the beards in the movie kind of, they have like way too clean of edges, because I wanted it to kind of be the idea of how these kids thought their beards looked, as opposed to how they actually would have looked. Like, the whole movie is sort of this escape into what they think is happening. This kind of happened by accident. This is like I did not intend to look like a weirdo all the time, like a strange Viking garbage man. This just sort of happened during Kong, and now I'm stuck with it, and I don't know how to get it off my face, and I don't even remember what I look like underneath it. So now I'm just a wizard man. I don't know how to answer the question beyond me looking like an idiot. So that's what's happening.
From your standpoint as director, what is the common point or theme between Kings of Summer and Kong Skull Island?
The question is, for me as a director, what the single theme between Kings of Summer and Kong Skull Island is, and I think it's two things. One, I think there's through lines of camaraderie and the communities that we build around ourselves. I think there's also sort of a similarity in these like left of center characters. You know, I think Biagio in Kings of Summer and Marlowe in Kong are like kindred spirits. I think that those are like basically the same kind of character. These like weird oddballs that should take you out of the movie but instead invest you more. But thematically, I think that there's just something about reaching beyond your current means. I think that there's something about wanting better, something almost beyond normal life, something mythological, you know, something greater than the mundane suburbs and larger than the tallest apes. I think that there's a lot of my characters are sort of being thrust into situations where they're reaching for more. I mean, one of the things I'm most proud of is I think you can look at those two movies and see a lot of similarities. So I would actually be more curious what you guys think are the same.
Lastly,
there's also a lot of flares. The main thematic similarity is my use of lens flares.
Lastly, as much as we can say right now, would you tell us what you're working on next? Japanese film lovers are very much looking for your next film.
The question is what I'm working on next. There are many things, not many of which I can tell you right now. Hold on. Trying to get this guy made. The one and only Metal Gear Rex. That's a passion project of mine that I'm trying to figure out right now. We have a script that I really love, and it's well known how much I adore the characters and world of Hideo Kojima. So I'm trying to get that made right now, and then there's some other sort of video game related projects that I'm working on, and some in TV, some in film, and honestly, most of the things I'm working on right now I can't really talk about, but hopefully they are all things my fans in Japan will enjoy and will give me many more reasons to come back to Japan very frequently.
That's it?
Yep.